Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be filmed in my humble abode. This is the I've been sick for a week version of Form Check Friday, so you have to excuse my lovely singing voice and if I sniffle and or break out into obnoxious coughing fits during this video. But getting right into it, our first Form Check Friday it was submitted by Alex Alfaro, but he says it's for his buddy Martin. Now Martin has a pretty rough looking deadlift here. Alex said he tried to get him to bring his hips a little bit higher to flatten his back. It's a conventional deadlift and he's pretty cannonballed, pretty rounded over. So honestly, that would have been my biggest advice as well, would be to try and let your hips a little bit higher. I know I'm a big advocate of getting the hips down, using a fair bit of quads out of the bottom, but this is pretty excessive, and as you can see, by the time the bar comes off the floor, he's pretty much stiff-legged anyways. So at that point, it's kind of a moot point to be sitting your butt down so far. I think you could do a better job trying to find somewhere where there's more tension. Try and find more tension in the glutes, the hamstrings, and work on getting that back extended. I mean, I guess judging by just how broken down the technique is here, probably gonna need a pretty substantial deload if you want to change that motor pattern. So that would be the biggest thing there, is like you suggested, Alex, try and get your friend to bring his hips a little bit higher, as well as trying to just learn how to find tension in a good position. Get him maybe to top down setup a couple times, see if he can get the gist of kind of setting his back a little bit better, and see if that helps. Hopefully it does. So this is gonna be a little bit of a deadlift special, actually, this video. I noticed as I was putting it together and going through the submissions, every single submission in this Form Check Friday is a deadlift. So we're gonna do a deadlift spectacular in commemoration of that cool deadlift that I pulled last weekend. Next one comes from Jackie Fan, and again, kind of very similar issue. He says he's having trouble with lockouts, feeling like he's gonna black out, and it looks like one of the reasons you're struggling is because we're sitting the hips too low and the back's getting really rounded off the floor. So the biggest thing that I think you need to correct and work on, you can see he really struggles locking this a second rep in. Looks like he's trying really hard not to hitch it there, and that can be pretty defeating come time to compete. Yeah, the biggest thing is, and again, I think that cue of getting your hips low in the conventional deadlift and the sumo deadlift, we'll touch on that later, but I think that cue of getting your hips low, as with any good cue, can be exaggerated a little bit to the point where it's causing you an issue. So it looks like hips too low, a little bit more back extension is something that we need. And again, probably gonna need to dial the weight back on the bar a little bit in order to sort of dial in some of these things. Our next submission comes from Seamus. And Seamus says he's 6'2", he's got a long torso, and he feels like he can't keep his back from rounding in the deadlift. Now, the biggest thing that I see with Seamus's pull is that he doesn't set his back to start off with. So Seamus, the biggest thing I would work on is trying to find a neutral position with your hands on the bar. Use your back to kind of pull your hips into position, and prioritize setting your back as part of your setup. Because it looks like you probably have the ability and the mobility to be able to set your back, but it doesn't look like you're setting any tension into the bar with your setup in your deadlift. So that would be the first thing I would address. Next up, we have two videos from Alex Bogdan. He's got a couple of sumo deadlifts here. The first one's raw, and he, again, like we were talking about earlier, really tries to sink his hips really low, and what ends up happening is, because the bar doesn't start moving, you can see his hips kind of adjust and shake around a little bit before the bar comes off the floor. So again, I think this is something that we can correct by, instead of thinking about how low you can get your hips in your setup, I want you to try to think about how tight you can get during your setup. So I want you to lower your hips to a point where they feel at their most stretched and their most tense and their most loaded position, as opposed to trying to get them down as far as you can and get as upright as you can. The other video that he submitted is him doing an equipped deadlift in a meet. And he said he is having a really hard time setting his back with an equipped deadlift, and that doesn't surprise me. That's probably one of the hardest things to do in a tight deadlift suit, is to be able to set your back and your shoulders. So the biggest thing I would recommend there is just practice in the suit. I would recommend going through a number of setups before you actually pull the bar. If your training is anything similar to mine, you're in your suit relatively often, but you don't necessarily have a whole lot of reps to work with. So what I would do is I would pull into the bar 3 or 4 times, try and set your back, have a camera set up from the side, and then go and review that footage. and use that as feedback and do that a couple of times, maybe 4, 8, 10 different setups before you actually pull a rep. And that can really help you sort of drill that good technique in, make sure that you're getting your back flat in the suit, because it can be really tough. As soon as you're in the suit, there's a lot of tension pulling your shoulders down towards your hips, and it also messes with your proprioception. It messes with how things feel a little bit. So you might be getting to a point where you feel extended, but it's not quite extended because the suit's messing with how everything feels. This next one is from Osian. I'm sorry, man, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce your name, but we're seeing a little bit more rounding in the back here with sumo deadlift. This time it's in the mid back, and again, I think just some practice with the setup and maybe trying to, it's interesting seeing people round right where they set their belt, because I think a lot of times I've had clients go from a really nice neutral back. As soon as they put their belt on, they kind of lose it. And it's like I was saying with the suit, it can mess with your proprioception, or how things feel, your perception of where your body is in space, whether or not your back's flat or not. So the biggest thing I would try to work on is practice setting your back before you dig into the bar. So again, really focus on setting your back as a priority in your setup, as opposed to trying to find the right hip height. And I think that your hip height is going to be more dictated by a good back position, whereas I think a lot of people who set up with their hip height as a priority in their setup, I think are often sacrificing their back. So try that, let me know if that works for you, man. This next one's from Jawad, and he actually has a pretty good sumo deadlift here. So the biggest thing I'm seeing, he's got a decent back position, but he's rushing it off the floor. So the biggest thing we're seeing is a good starting position, and then whoop, everything kind of comes out of position as he initiates the lift. So the biggest and most important cues I think you could focus on, Jawad, would be to try and be more patient off the floor, and also to try and use your quads a little bit better as you initiate the pull. Some pause deadlifts can be really, really valuable in teaching you that, to make sure you don't get tipped back out of position. So let's try to make sure that you are being a little bit more patient out of the bottom of your deadlift, and that should help keep everything in the right position. Next up we have Gary Young, and he's doing some more sumo deadlifts here. This is 250 kilos for a double. Looks like he's got a beautiful Alico set up there. And so this is something I wanted to note, is right before he goes to reach for the bar, his back's in a great position. But as soon as he reaches forward to the bar, that's when he loses position. So what I would like you to do is be a little bit more intentional when you go to grab the bar. Because right here at about 3 seconds into the video, great position. And then even as you kind of drop yourself down, you do almost a little bit of a bounce there. Maintain that back position, man. That's the only part that you're losing it in, is you're going like this to reach the bar. Push into your hips more to reach your bar, to reach the bar. Maybe try setting up from the bottom up. The way that I set up, I grab the bar first and then pull my back flat to dictate my hip height, like I was talking about earlier. That might be something that's useful for you, but it's just a very, very slight deviation. But as you can see, first rep pretty smooth, second rep having to fight a fair bit with the lockout there. So anytime we're fighting with the lockout, generally what's happening is we're losing a little bit of position through the back. So I would try to set up from the bottom up, see if you can grab onto the bar, set your lats, set your back, and then just pull from there. Because it looks like you could clearly get into that position, but as soon as you go to reach for the bar, that's when things are rounding out. So let's try and mess with that setup a little bit and see if we can't maintain the position that you're creating a little bit better when you go to initiate your pull. Next up, we got a video from a guy named Ronnie Griggs. Ronnie Griggs is doing some conventional deadlifts here. He looks like he's a pretty big guy. One thing I'm noticing right off the hop, and the thing that I think is making it hardest for him to get into a good position, you can see his low back's a little bit rounded out as he pulls in. I think one of the things we can do here, Ronnie, is we can try to narrow things up a little bit. So what I would try to do is I would try to move your stance in maybe about an inch, and move your grip in inch and a half or so. Excuse me, it's hard to tell with the angle of filming, but try and get it so that your forearms are kind of right against your knees. You don't want to be crowding the knees because you don't want to see those knees go inwards we want to have enough room that we can even push the knees out a little bit. But if we narrow that stance and narrow that grip, that's going to allow you to be more upright through your setup, and you might get that last little bit of extension to be able to maintain your position. You can see the lockout gets a little bit shaky here towards the top too. And again, it's just a loss of position in the back. So that's it, guys. That's our deadlift special. I hope everybody who deadlifts learned something and has something they can take away from that, whether they're sumo, conventional, whatever. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for bearing with me during my coughing fits and my shitty voice. If you liked the video, leave a like. Any questions on anything you see in the video, comment below, and we will see you guys soon. Take care. Just one more thing I wanted to mention really quick to you guys. We are going to be launching our new apparel on Monday. We're super excited about this. We're gonna have men's tees and crew neck sweaters for sale on Monday. Very shortly afterwards, we're gonna have our women's tees, women's racerbacks, and 3/4 length baseball tees. So stay tuned for that.